Good morning, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio, Sinoland in Chiang Mai, Thailand. And I am very, very honored to have Barb Hammer on the show today. How are you doing, Barb?
I'm fine, Jeff. How are you doing today?
Doing great. You are in British Columbia, Canada, and I am in Thailand. And let me tell you all a little bit about Barb. Barb, also known as Aunt BB, is a transplanted native of Virginia who now lives in Canada with dual citizenship. She's studied international affairs and development as well as business in both the USA and Canada. She worked for 8 years as a translator and an analyst in the intelligence community, mainly the National Security Agency. That could probably be a show right there in itself.
I know.
Then walked away and eventually immigrated to Canada. She worked as a teacher, accountant, and in retail industry before finally retiring with her Canadian husband in Vancouver, in the Vancouver area. Welcome on the show, Barb.
Oh, thank you for having me, Jeff. It's a pleasure to talk to you because I have so much respect for your knowledge of China, and I'm relatively new at it.
Well, you're doing a great job. Barb reached out to me, I don't know, a few months ago and said, "Hey, I follow China Rising Radio Sinoland and I've used some of your work in my programs." And so I said, well, I thought, wow, this Aunt BB, she's got a YouTube channel, and she's mad, and she wants to make the world a better place for the 99%. So we started a conversation together, and I said, I got to get this lady on the show. So, Barb, just to start out, please introduce yourself and tell us how you became a freedom fighter for social justice.
Okay, so how this all started, my activism began in 2016 during the Bernie Sanders campaign. That's how it started. So I got interested in his campaign because I kind of knew vaguely about him. And I thought, well, this is a good good politician to support, I thought. And boy, was that an awakening. Like I didn't know the full story about Bernie Sanders, but then I saw so many fake things going on in the primaries and so much election fraud. And that was a real awakening. That's when I started my awakening. And I realized how many things that we're told are just not true. About Bernie, about our election process in the US. And I learned the same thing in Canada, really. And that's how it got me started. And I was following a lot of online content creators and YouTubers. And then I became disenchanted with them after the election and things that they were saying, and they were some of them flipping to the Trump train, I guess, jumping on the Trump train because that's where the money was. And then my real awakening was another YouTuber who's now my friend, Scott Creighton of the Church Dog 42 channel. And he had his original YouTube channel purged along with many others in February of 2018. And then he had his WordPress blog purged as well in August of that year. And I've been very supportive of him. And he's helped me get my channel started and encouraged me to start a blog, which I have, but I haven't done much writing there. And I don't know, the rest is history. So I am just constantly seeing things, fake narratives being pushed out there. And my latest awakening has been about China. And this is very recent. So on June 4th, the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square, I saw a different narrative than I was accustomed to about there wasn't really a massacre at Tiananmen. Well, there was no massacre at Tiananmen Square. And that I eventually realized that was Gene Sharp's, CIA military academic Gene Sharp's first color revolution. They were trying to overthrow the Chinese government.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
I wrote a long article about it.
Yeah, so that was my awakening. And then I realized what you call the big lie propaganda machine about China.
Yeah.
Everything you're told about China is just a lie.
Yeah, I know.
And
Well,
I'm a real advocate for China, and a lot of Chinese people appreciate, Westerners, you must know, Westerner defending China against all these lies.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, tell us just, and you also, I know you've also taught, you've also, on your YouTube channel, you've also covered, Russia, Iran, as well as China. Just, what are you, just your, all the fake narratives, just, about,
Hmm. Hmm.
just those are obviously the three. Well, we could also add,
That's right.
we
That's
could
right.
also add Venezuela. But if you could, but those four are the real boogie bears for,
Hmm. Hmm.
to destroy,
Absolutely. Yes.
for global capitalism, is to take down Venezuela, Russia, China, and Iran. Just your general thoughts on the incredible effort and the billions of dollars being spent to try to destroy those four countries, and many others for that matter. But
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
those are the four at the top of the list. Tell us what you've learned.
Well, it's all of these countries that are a threat to the US and Western dominance in the world. The US is losing its position as the number one economy. I wonder if China isn't already the number one economy. And I'm interested in world events in general. And I just see this trend where all of these countries that are a threat to that dominance, Russia and China, and Iran and leftist governments in Latin America, like the troika of tyranny, which is Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. Yes, they are a threat. And unfortunately, Bolivia has fallen, but maybe they'll come back. Maybe, yeah, unfortunately. And I've traveled to Cuba because I want to go to these countries too, to just say, well, they're being smeared in the Western media. And I'm planning to go to Nicaragua too. I have a contact there. So I'm going to travel to Nicaragua as someone who's in the solidarity movement there with the Sandinista government, Daniel Ortega's government. So I just want to show the reality of these countries and how they're being smeared. And so I defend China. The ridiculous new Cold War that we have is really what's going on against Russia and China. And, a lot of these things that are going on, like in Iran, Latin America, and Evo Morales' government being overthrown in Bolivia, has to do with China. Countries would rather do business with China and get a fair shake rather than getting the shaft from the US and the West.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Also, another thing that you talk about a lot, and this is something that is reviewed extensively on the Greenville Post, is fake leftists, or sincere leftists, or sincere Marxists who get wrapped up in identity politics, and who because they, for whatever reason, the Trotskyites and these, they can't stand the fact that China is successful, and so people that should be supporting China and other other countries, who are trying to live and work independently of Western tyranny. Just tell us how your feelings about those kind of maybe good intentioned or wrongly informed, leftists, progressives, liberals, Marxists, etc.
Yeah, it's amazing. There are a lot of people who sort of embrace the ideology, but then they still smear China and say, oh, it's an imperialist power and they're trying to exploit other countries. And I'm just going, I just shake my head like, what are you talking about? And there are a lot of people on the left also who claim to be anti-war, or people who are anti-war, but they don't seem to be opposed to regime change. Like they buy into a lot of these color revolutions. It's just amazing. And then there were some on the left, some supposedly leftist media, they will speak the truth about one part of the world, and then they push propaganda or disinformation about another part of the world. And that seems to be how they survive or something. They don't get censored as much. It's just very weird. It's the Cass Sunstein agents in the media. So,
Yeah, well, yeah, those are sort of the what the CIA uses. It's called, the managed or controlled opposition.
Yes.
They appear to be, liberal and leftist and
anti-imperial. Yeah, they're not really anti-imperialist.
But they're really just being manipulated either knowingly or unknowingly, by the deep state. Yeah, tell us about. I even had to write the guy, Cass Sunstein.
Sunstein,
Sunstein. Yeah. He was Obama. He's an Obama boy. Tell us about him.
Well, I call him Obama's propaganda czar. So they realized had a problem. It ultimately came down to the 9/11 truth movement. They were trying to stop the dissent about what happened, the events of 9/11. And maybe, I don't know if everybody realizes it was an inside job.
Of course.
But you'll hear a lot of disinformation, the Muslims did it and the government let them do it, or they'll blame the Saudis did it. But they won't talk about the truth about how it was an inside job. It was the U.S. government with other governments, especially the Israeli government, involved in that. So that's how the whole Cass Sunstein thing started. And so he actually, I don't know if you're aware of him. He's the one who came up with the idea of WikiLeaks. And my friend Scott Creighton, he will say WikiLeaks. He'll pronounce it that way, but it's very good. WikiLeaks. So they were deliberately leaked. If you remember, they started out, they were the State Department cables. And so, State Department cables are going to have a lot of, standard propaganda. And so, in WikiLeaks, they mix truth with propaganda. So people will accept everything from WikiLeaks. There's a lot of good information from WikiLeaks, but you can't trust everything from WikiLeaks. And so WikiLeaks was actually the number one target for WikiLeaks was China. But other countries as well, Iran and Nicaragua, and a lot of these countries that are smeared. So the Julian Assange was actually a CIA creation, but a lot of people don't realize that. So that's Cass Sunstein. He's the one that came up with the idea of WikiLeaks, and it was actually introduced in the mainstream media started talking about WikiLeaks even before it started. And I didn't realize this until last year, really. I know, I didn't realize this until last year. It involved, and not everybody, but this is, I know.
You're stepping on a lot of liberal toes when you start saying that Julian Assange is a CIA creation, but
there's a lot of evidence to support that. But yeah.
Well, I'm going to interview John Potash on his second book about, drugs. The CIA and the FBI use drugs to.
Oh yeah.
And so all the gurus from the '60s, they were all manipulated by the CIA. So I mean, it's not. Julian Assange would not be any less any lesser, because all those other guys from the '60s were just as manipulated too. So
it's amazing when you dig and dig. It's amazing what you find. The CIA has really hijacked the left. The identity politics.
Yeah.
That's a CIA thing to distract from. Yeah. You're not supposed to talk about class politics.
Of course, yeah.
It's still Martin Luther King Day here where I am. And people think, Martin Luther King was assassinated for talking about the civil rights movement and being anti-war. No, he started talking about class and uniting poor whites and poor blacks, poor minority. He was uniting everybody. And that's the real danger. You're not supposed to talk about class. Yeah,
absolutely. There is no class warfare in the United States, supposedly.
Keep the races and the genders fighting, and everything is just fine for the ruling class, isn't it?
Hey, listen, you also talked about, your dad's experiences when he was drafted into the Army during World War II. Yeah, that inspires you. He was sent to
Mm-hmm.
Panama Canal in Nicaragua, where
Mm-hmm.
he
I know.
learned about the criminal policies of the USA. Smedley
Yeah.
Butler. Then he was sent to France. My gosh, where he saw
Yes.
terrible atrocities committed against the French people. Please tell us about that. Considering you're a French translator, and I'm a dual national American and French. So tell us about all that. Your dad.
Oh yeah. Well, he was my dad. See, my family roots. I'm from Virginia, but my family roots are in West Virginia. So my dad came from a hillbilly family, but he was always interested in the world. And so he got drafted during World War II. And it is strange that he was sent to, I don't know which one he was sent to first, Panama Canal Zone or Nicaragua. But it was Nicaragua, especially, that he really learned about the criminal history of U.S. foreign policy and how the U.S. had sent Marines down to Nicaragua to help fight, what is it, Sandino, the bandit. And so they were sent down to prop up the Somoza regime. And so Somoza was still the leader in Nicaragua when my dad was sent in with the U.S. Army in Nicaragua. And he told us kids some stories. And I was talking to my sister recently, and she kind of knew a few more details. So my dad with some buddies, that they had gone up to the presidential palace in Managua, to get a closer look. And as they approached the palace, I don't know if there was a fence around it, he noticed that there were like machine guns on the roof of the palace, and they started to point the guns at him and his buddies. And my sister told me my dad so they were going to shoot him and his buddies if they got too close. And my sister told me that my dad actually recognized the weapons that the guards on the roof of the palace were using, and they were U.S. weapons. So my dad thought it was well, that's interesting. I'm about to be shot by U.S. weapons.
There you go.
And then he and some buddies went outside of Managua to a little town or village, and the people there thought they were mistook them for Marines, and the Marines were hated there because the Marines were known for the U.S. Marines were known for suppressing the people and propping up Somoza. So he and his buddies, they were going to be killed by the locals, and they had to quickly persuade the locals that they were not Marines, that they are in the U.S. Army. Yeah.
And what happened in France?
So then he was eventually sent to France after the Normandy invasion. So he was part of that fighting there against the Germans. And my dad was in the artillery. So that was his, I think he was good at math. So he was good at calculating, whatever they needed to do to direct the fire at the Germans. And they actually won a Bronze Star.
Good morning, everybody. For you YouTube fans out there, Barb and I are going to try to hide it. Yesterday, she lost her computer because Windows did that big update that's in the news, and it took her all night to get her laptop updated. And now it's the next day, and as you can see behind me, I started practicing using the green screen last night.
Oh.
So I'm not even going to try to hide the fact that I'm sure the lighting's different for both of us, so I'm not even going to try to hide that. This has been done in two parts, so I'll try to splice it together as best as possible. Anyway, good morning, Barb. How are you doing?
Good evening. Yeah, for me. Well, no, afternoon. Sorry, afternoon. Yeah, afternoon.
And anyway, we got to where you talked about your dad in Nicaragua and Panama, and he saw ugly things as a soldier. That American empire was doing to the locals there. And then, but I really perked up. Can you tell us about what he saw in France during the World War II D-Day invasion?
Well, after learning to hate the Somoza regime in Nicaragua, he was sent to France. And he loved France. He loved the French people. But he saw, there was a war being waged in France, and it wasn't just soldiers who were being affected. And inevitably in war, there are mistakes. Oops. So, French villages or towns would be bombed accidentally. And so, the French people, I don't know, maybe you know more about this, not necessarily thrilled about being liberated.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of civilians that lost their lives and homes destroyed. So the French people didn't have such a great love for U.S. troops there, he learned. So they often, when there was a mistaken bombing, by the U.S., trying to supposedly go after German forces, they would hit civilians and towns and villages, and the French wanted to murder the U.S. troops afterward. Yeah, so it could be quite ugly. So he learned that. It's not a pretty picture, war and liberation.
Well, I'm really glad you brought this up, Barb, because last summer, I'm half French and half American through my with my wife being French, and we actually she has roots in Normandy, and we have her family has a house right.
I saw you there. Yeah, I know what you're talking
and
about.
so
yeah.
Go on to, for all the fans out there, go on to my blog, China Rising Radio Sinoland, and search Dirty Dark Secrets of D-Day, D-DAY. It was those bombings were not accidental; they were intentional. The United States.
Okay, yeah. See, that's why I go.
Bombed 1,500 French towns and villages, flat most of them, massacred over 50,000 Frenchmen. Maybe as high as 80 to 100,000. We'll never really know. Even the Germans, including the 25,000 people that they sent back east to the concentration camps, only killed 30,000 in the years that they were in France. In 2 or 3 months, the United States exterminated 50,000 French people, innocent French citizens. Documented raping, thousands of women in France and Germany and England. They even raped over American soldiers. Even raped over 1,000 soldiers in England. Raped over 1,000 girls and women in England. So that is the ugly face of empire, and your dad probably had to stomach all that.
Yeah, he was very traumatized. I think he suffered some trauma from whatever, and I know he didn't talk about everything that he saw, but I knew he saw some bad things. So he would get very emotional sometimes, and I knew that was from his wartime experience, and he actually had a nervous breakdown after the war. So
you can imagine.
He didn't tell us everything he saw, but I know he told my mother a lot, but she just mentioned, he told her a lot of things that he saw, but I'm sure he didn't even tell her half of what he'd seen.
Well, that's the great, and of course that what the Americans did during D-Day has been totally suppressed and denied by the French.
The French government, I'm sure they suppressed it.
And just the denial of not wanting to accept the fact that their supposed allies actually killed tens and tens of thousands of their own people. And anyway, NGOs, I love your phrase, charity scams. Tell us
what they are.
What you've learned about NGOs.
Well, this is when I started looking to what's going on in Hong Kong with the terrorism there, the Western intel. And they use NGOs as fronts. So the big front, the number one front for the CIA is the National Endowment for Democracy. That has such a wonderful name.
Yeah,
But it's disgusting what they do. They fund terrorism, basically, to overthrow governments. But it's a huge, but oh yeah, you call it the CIA complex, I think.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I am digging and I learn more and more about more and more NGOs, non-governmental organizations, supposedly, but they're really government fronts, really.
Yeah, shell fronts.
And I think the British have they call them quasi quangos or something.
Yeah.
Have you heard that term?
Yeah. Quandos.
And they will actually solicit donations. So there's so many, like in Hong Kong, there's the Hong Kong Free Press. And they are so proud of the fact that they're crowdfunded. Well, that's bullshit. They're funded by these Western regime change NGOs. It's just a propaganda outlet they've created. Hong Kong Free Press. Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, well, and then of course China. Actually, it was India that came up with the first NGO control law, because they realized, and then I also wrote an article about this a while back, and then Russia signed an NGO control law where they, and then China, saw this, and of course China kicked out NED and George Soros and Pierre Omidyar and the IRI, the Republican one, and the NDI, the Democratic Party one, and Human Rights Watch, and
Ken Roth. Yeah, Ken Roth was denied entry into Hong Kong recently. I was so happy to hear that.
Yeah. Freedom House, all these CIA fronts, they got kicked out of China. So that's what more and more countries need to do. They just need to say, adios, baby. Get the hell out, because
Evo Morales' government tried to do that. They had kicked USAID. People don't realize, it's USAID. No, that's another CIA front or regime change front. But instead what they did in Bolivia is they used Colombian and Ecuadorian NGOs to go in there to overthrow Evo Morales' government in Bolivia.
Yeah.
So, you get rid of one and another one comes in.
I hadn't heard that about Evo Morales. Well, of course, I know he was kicked out by a fascist junta, which was
the U.S.
organized by the
United
States, and then finally censorship. You and I have you mentioned someone yesterday, Scott. What was his name?
Scott Creighton. So I sent you an email with a So Scott of all the people that I know of, he's suffered the most. So he started out in the 9/11 truth community. He started looking into that, and because of his background in construction and drafting, he was looking at the details of the World Trade Center buildings and how they came down, and it wasn't the way the official narrative. And so he started his American Everyman blog, and then he had a YouTube channel called American Everyman. So in February of 2018, there was a big YouTube purge. And so his channel was removed. And that was actually over his investigation of the Las Vegas shooting.
That was so.
The Gladio event. So he looks into these Gladio events. And then in August of 2018, his American Everyman WordPress blog, there was a big WordPress purge. So there were a lot of blogs on WordPress that were purged for supposedly violating community standards, but they didn't violate any community standards. And then before that, after his YouTube channel was taken down, his PayPal account was actually terminated. And the explanation was a link to his American Everyman blog. That was the explanation. Well, we just don't like what you're saying. And then in August of let's see. Oh, 2018 too. So he had everything happen to him in 2018. He got one of those slap lawsuits
Oh
against
my God,
him
that's
filed
the
again. And it was over his
unbelievable.
reporting of the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally in 2017 and the truth behind that. And that's actually why his PayPal account was, wait a minute, I think, yeah, actually, I think that's actually why his PayPal account was taken down. The reason was his reporting on that. Because I came up with an article, I found an article where PayPal was going to get rid of accounts that were sort of connected to, suggesting they were Nazis or whatever. So
God.
he's been smeared in the media, mainstream media, as a right wing nationalist or whatever, right wing, and he's not. He's very traditionally leftist. So that's great. That he's the worst case, honestly. And then he's had other things. He got cheated by a platform kind of like Patreon. Tried to cheat. They did cheat him out of money. That was a scam. They cheated a bunch of people. And then Patreon froze his account for a while. And I complained. When I'm mad, I complain. And I think and others, because we complained to Patreon, they unfroze his account. So
Oh my
honestly,
gosh.
he's been through so much.
Well, it's not, people out there do not realize that it's not just a handful, but I mean, hundreds of thousands of collectively, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, PayPal,
Yeah, that's
Patreon.
crazy.
You add all of those. YouTube, entire YouTube channels closed down. It's affected me.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
I've had several. I've had a couple of social media accounts closed down, and I've had, Twitter is suppressing me, and so it's not hundreds, it's not that hundreds of thousands around the world have been completely snuffed out because they're telling the truth about empire and our oligarchic owners. So it's a serious problem, and they can't stand it. And they can't kill us all. They don't have the manpower to run around and assassinate us all. So they just shut us down. And
muzzle us. Yeah. Well, I'm really good. I have a talent for getting shut down on Twitter. So I've had 2 accounts banned on Twitter.
Oh, really? You too? Okay.
In little over a year.
Oh my gosh.
And the account I use right now is my husband's that he wasn't really using. He's on Facebook. So he said, okay, you can have this, because they wouldn't let me start another one. So, but they will nail me. There are other people who can say outrageous things on Twitter, nothing, but because I speak the truth, I get people coming after me constantly. Today on Twitter, somebody was saying I should have my account shut down just because I was saying, the impeachment trial right now, Trump is just a cover up of Joe Biden's corruption in Ukraine. Because I hadn't been following it. I thought it was all over Russia, but now because that was debunked. Now they had to come up with another reason to impeach Trump. And I'm not a Trump supporter. I didn't vote for Trump or Hillary.
Yeah.
But they assume I'm a Trump supporter or something. I'm like, no.
Well, they plug in these algorithms. And if you mention the word communism or socialism or social justice or oligarchs or whatever X number of times, it just trips a switch and you're off. So
well, it's amazing how these accounts find me. Yeah, I say something. Oh, I'm not supposed to say.
Well, and then yesterday in RT, I saw an article where Joe Biden was basically threatening media, openly threatening media not to talk about Ukraine. So I'm sure with all of his, oligarchic connections. They have now put algorithms into all the social media, WordPress, etc. That if you attach Joe Biden with Ukraine, then you are then you are to be crushed. So so much for freedom of the press and democracy.
I know.
Western democracy, man.
I know, democracy. That's why, when I'm talking about regime change whenever I see the words freedom, democracy, human rights, or civil rights, I know what's really up.
Yeah, absolutely.
To overthrow a government. Those are the key words, yeah.
Hey, listen, Barb, this has been such a wonderfully refreshing interview, and to see someone like you who just recame enlightened about your arc of awareness, and we need a million more like you, and you remind me there's another famous hammer out there, your Barb Hammer, remember from the 1960s, Fannie Lou Hammer, although she spelled hers with just
Hammer. Yeah, it's Hammer.
Hammer.
Yeah, I know.
1 M, 2 M's.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Oh, there's another thing I forgot about my family is my mother's uncle was an FDR New Deal Democrat. He was a governor of West Virginia. I've forgotten about that.
Really?
Yeah. Yes. He was.
Amazing.
Yeah. And West Virginia is a terribly poor state. It's like the top two poorest. Mississippi and West Virginia are really dirt poor.
Well, and Oklahoma, where I grew up.
Oh, really?
Well, tell us about your future plans before we sign out.
Well, I haven't been very productive lately, and that's circumstances to do with my living situation right now. It's hard to do videos, but I need to get back and I need to write more. So I started a blog. So there's one good solid piece there I wrote about Hong Kong and China, and it stands up. But I need to write more on there and just keep putting out the truth. And I incorporate travel too. So I'm going to go back to Cuba again. I'm going to Nicaragua.
I'd like to go to both of those places, and North Korea and some.
North Korea too.
Eritrea and Africa, hanging in there trying to fight empire and
Iran is another place.
And I actually have friends there. I could actually.
I have friends there.
Meet people. So. Did you include your blog in your list of information you gave me?
I did, I believe. Okay, I'm pretty sure I did. Good. Yeah. So, when I go to Cuba, I make a point. I could easily go as a Canadian citizen, no problem. But I make a point of going as a U.S. citizen. And so there's certain hoops you have to jump through. So you have to have go under a certain category, and they've restricted it. But I go as a journalist. Okay. So I make a point, and the people there are very happy. They don't see that many the most Americans they see are because they're Cuban American. So the families. So, and in North Korea, they don't allow U.S. citizens into the country because they've had too many problems with U.S. government. So I would definitely have to go as a Canadian citizen to North Korea.
We would have to use. I'd have to use my French passport for that too. So,
yes. So.
Well, listen.
So much
Barb,
for freedom. So much for freedom as an American citizen. So much freedom.
Well, listen, Barb. This has been a wonderfully refreshing, and it's inspired me, and to hear your story and how you've come alive and are out there, fighting on the airwaves, telling the truth, and you've got your Aunt BB YouTube channel, which I subscribe to.
That's Scott Creighton's idea. He came up with the name, so he inspired me. But he liked. I told him a story about my nieces couldn't say my name, so they called me Aunt BB.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I have to credit him with that.
Anyway, thank you,
Okay.
thank you so much. And as soon as I get this up, I'll send you a link so you can post it on your YouTube.
Oh, thank you. Great.
And then you can blast it out on what's left of your social media that hasn't been censored.
I haven't gotten any suspensions on my current Twitter account. So.
Hey, well, listen, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And let's stay in touch. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah,
it's been a real pleasure to get to know each other more than just across the emails. All right?
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
All right. Bye-bye. I'll get this done and let you know. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.